Excerpts from the United Nations document A/AC.14/32. Ad hoc Committee on the Palestinian Question, Report of Subcommittee 2, 11th of November 1947. Excerpts from the introduction and conclusion are reproduced here. Copyright of the United Nations 1947. Excerpts from Introduction. Introduction. 1. Subcommittee 2 on Palestine was set up on the 23rd of October 1947, following the decision of the Ad hoc Committee on Palestine to establish two subcommittees. By virtue of the authority conferred on him by the Ad hoc Committee, the chairman nominated the following countries as members of Subcommittee 2: Afghanistan, Colombia, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Syria and Yemen. The terms of reference of the subcommittee were as follows. 1. To draw up a detailed plan for the future government of Palestine, in accordance with the basic principles expressed in the proposal submitted to the General Assembly by delegations of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, documents A/317 and A/328 respectively, and the proposal submitted to the Ad hoc Committee by the delegations of Syria, document A/14/22. 2. To incorporate this plan in the form of recommendations. Working groups were established to deal with each of these main issues, and they were constituted as follows. 1. Legal problems: Pakistan, Syria and Saudi Arabia. 2. Refugee problems: Afghanistan, Colombia and Lebanon. 3. Constitutional proposals: Egypt, Iraq and Yemen. Excerpts from conclusion. Resolution number 1. Draft resolution referring certain legal questions to the International Court of Justice. Considering that the Palestine question raises certain legal issues connected inter alia with the inherent right of the indigenous population of Palestine to their country and to determine its future, the pledges and assurances given to the Arabs in the First World War regarding the independence of Arab countries, including Palestine, the validity and scope of the Balfour Declaration and the mandate, the effect on the mandate of the dissolution of the League of Nations and of the declaration by the mandatory power of its intentions to withdraw from Palestine. Considering that the Palestine question also raises other legal issues connected with the competence of the United Nations to recommend any solution contrary to the Covenant of the League of Nations or the Charter of the United Nations or to the wishes of the majority of the people of Palestine. Considering that doubts have been expressed by several member states concerning the legality under the Charter of any action by the United Nations or by any member state or group of member states to enforce any proposal which is contrary to the wishes or is made without the consent of the majority of the inhabitants of Palestine. Considering that these questions involve legal issues which so far have not been pronounced upon by any impartial or competent tribunal, and it is essential that such questions be authoritatively determined before the United Nations can recommend a solution of the Palestine question in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, The General Assembly of the United Nations resolves to request the International Court of Justice to give an advisory opinion under Article 96 of the Charter and Chapter 4 of the Statute of the Court on the following questions. 1. Whether the indigenous population of Palestine has not an inherent right to Palestine and to determine its future constitution and government. 2. Whether the pledges and assurances given by Great Britain to the Arabs during the First World War, including the Anglo-French Declaration of 1918, concerning the independence and future of Arab countries at the end of the war, did not include Palestine. 3. Whether the Balfour Declaration, which was made without the knowledge or consent of the indigenous population of Palestine, was valid and binding on the people of Palestine, or consistent with the earlier and subsequent pledges and assurances given to the Arabs. 4. Whether the provisions of the Mandate for Palestine regarding the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine are in conformity or consistent with the objectives and provisions of the Covenant of the League of Nations, in particular Article 22, or are compatible with the provisions of the Mandate relating to the development of self-government and the preservation of the rights and position of the Arabs of Palestine. 5. Whether the legal basis for the Mandate of Palestine has not disappeared with the dissolution of the League of Nations, and whether it is not the duty of the mandatory power to hand over power and administration to a government of Palestine representing the rightful people of Palestine. 6. Whether a plan to partition Palestine without the consent of the majority of its people is consistent with the objectives of the Covenant of the League of Nations and with the provisions of the Mandate of Palestine. 7. Whether the United Nations is competent to recommend either of the two plans, and recommendations of the majority or minority of the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, or any other solution involving partition of the territory of Palestine, or a permanent trusteeship over any city or part of Palestine without the consent of the majority of the people of Palestine. 8. Whether the United Nations or any of its member states is competent to enforce or recommend the enforcement of any proposal concerning the constitution and future government of Palestine, in particular, any plan of partition which is contrary to the wishes or adopted without the consent of the inhabitants of Palestine. The General Assembly instructs the Secretary-General to transmit this resolution to the International Court of Justice, accompanied by all documents likely to throw light upon the questions under reference.